crippling up the world economy in some sense for a while. It's now number 2 largest economy in the world, I believe. But China's got its own problems. We were talking before the show that it's might be a bubble economy there. So go into that a little, if you would.
China is absolutely a bubble economy. You know, it is the empire in the ascendancy. So it's not that they are in as weak a position in some ways as some other places, but the Depression in the 1930s came at the time when America was the empire in the ascendancy. It was the setback at the dawn of the American century. This, I would argue, is the setback at the dawn of the Chinese century. Things have massively overreached themselves. There's been a huge amount of malinvestment, state-driven investment where there are no signals as to what investments make sense. They're not increasing productivity. They're not doing anything for economic growth. There's just investment for the sake of investment. And a lot of that has crossed the line long since into things that will never, ever be productive in any way. And there is an enormous amount of bad debt in the Chinese system. There are huge housing bubbles in the coastal cities that really have been the center of the bubble. So there are enormous problems with China. Their northern food-producing area is probably going to be experiencing a dust bowl in the not-too-distant future. They've compromised their environment enormously. And what empires in the ascendancy do, of course, is move around looking for extra space in other places. And China is very much doing that in Africa at the moment. And that dynamic is very likely to expand because it's going to be very difficult for 1.3 billion people to continue to live in the area that is currently China. But there's going to be a massive setback. They're not going to be importing commodities on anything like the scale they have been. They have been holding up commodity demand for a long time, sucking in enormous amounts of raw materials in order to turn them around and sell them into the biggest global consumer boom in the history of the world. But the markets are going to dry up. When you have a period of depression, trade collapses. Trade fell by 66% in 2 years in the 1930s. And we are far more dependent on trade now. We're going to be looking at trade wars and protectionism. And when you can't get letters of credit, goods don't move. And we are not going to have letters of credit available in the way that they have been in an era of really severe credit crunch. So it's going to be very hard to move goods. Then we're going to realize that in the name of comparative advantage, we have built an entire network of very long and vulnerable supply chains. So we've offshored almost everything, including things that are going to be really important. We no longer make a lot of things in the places where we need them. When trade breaks down, that's going to have major knock-on effects. And the fall in demand for commodities is certainly going to punish commodity exporting countries like Canada and Australia, for instance. Their currencies are very likely to fall as a result. So people who are looking for a great bull market in commodities, I would say, well, we've had one, but that was where we came from. That's not where we're going to. I think we're going to look at a very significant retrenchment in commodity prices. First, as speculation goes into reverse, so the perception of scarcity that had led people to bid up the price in advance of the fundamentals will go into reverse. There's a perception that there's plenty of things like energy, that people are talking about oil shale and shale gas as if, say, well, we have plenty of it. That perception of glut will drive prices even further. Demand falls off a cliff and you drive them down even further. You get to the point where you're looking at the lowest cost producer and many, many other people are out of business. The investment dries up. Then when you have a period of several years of no investment, if the economy tries to recover, it starts to hit a hard ceiling at a much lower level of energy availability because there's been no investment for years, maybe even no maintenance of existing infrastructure. So then you end up with your energy crunch that comes some years later.
Well, now, as far as commodities, now let's talk about gold. Gold isn't, in effect, as much so an industrial commodity, but is more in the financial arena. Given all of these problems with different currencies and whatnot, how do you think gold will do?
I think the spot price of gold has a long way to fall. Anything that sees a parabolic rise typically sees a very, very sharp fall. But part of the problem with gold is not so much physical, it's that there's a massive Ponzi scheme in paper gold. So there are vastly more claims to gold than there is actual gold. It's the same problem we have in so many other areas. So the paper price of gold is deflating. So I wouldn't be surprised if the spot price of gold hit perhaps $600 an ounce.
No kidding.
But it's not just what the spot price does that's important. It depends who you are and how much money you have, basically, how much bargaining power you retain in really hard times. If you have no bargaining power and all you have is some gold and you realize that you can't really take it down to the shop and buy milk and bread with it, and you have to sell it for cash in order to buy the things you need, you have no bargaining power. You're not getting anywhere near the spot price. You'll be selling it for a song. So people who are buying gold but who are vulnerable in many other ways because they're still carrying debt they have to service, they have no cash when it's cash that will be so scarce that everyone will want, and they have no control over the essentials of their own existence, if they're still vulnerable in those ways, gold is not going to save them. They're going to be forced to sell it, and they're going to be selling it for a song. So I tell people, you can afford to buy gold if you can sit on it for 20 years without relying on the value it represents in the meantime. If you can do that, it is a good store of value. It has been for thousands of years. I wouldn't bet against that track record. But so many people are going to be forced to sell it into the ultimate buyer's market. And that's going to be a major problem for a lot of people who are currently looking to gold as a safe haven.
All right. Well, one last thing in our last minute or so. Oil, energy, natural gas. How do you see that?
We are approaching peak oil, and certainly in North America, peak natural gas as well. Conventional gas peaked in 2001. What we're looking at the moment is largely a mirage. Shale gas, shale oil. People are saying we don't have an energy problem. It's all solved. These have terrible energy return on energy invested. You put in almost as much energy as you get out at the other end. So it's not about what you produce, it's about the net between what goes in and what comes out. These are not energy sources in any real sense of the word because they do not deliver enough of an amount of energy return, energy profit ratio, to do anything approaching running our current society. So they're going to add to the hype that will crash prices, but then fail to deliver.
All right. Well, gosh, thank you so much for being here. It was so interesting and so informative. Thanks for joining us today, our viewers. Thanks for being here at NewsDesk. And please join us again the next episode, which is Wednesdays, 5:30 p.m., Friday mornings at 6:30, and Friday evenings at 9 p.m. Stay tuned for Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman. Bye for now.